Welcome to the HCI family of podcasts. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We share our own original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. Join us for practitioner-oriented content around all things leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with the HCI family of podcasts. Brett Hoogeveen, welcome to the conversation today.
Thank you, John.
It's a pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from Nebraska. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about building company culture from the bottom up. Brett, anything else you would like to share by way of your background or personal context before we dive on in?
Like you mentioned in the intro, I'm here in Omaha, Nebraska. I enjoy sharing briefly my background. The way I got into this business is we run a family business in better culture. And that's because my father has always been obsessed around company culture. He had a chance to start an organization in the Omaha area over 30 years ago that was laser focused on culture. Thought that was the secret to attracting and retaining talent. They went on to become the best place to work in Omaha 5 times in a row before he and I stepped away and said, can we share some knowledge with other people about how do you do this, both from the top down and the bottom up?
Well, that's really cool. Family run businesses, best places to work, all of that's wonderful. So you're walking the walk. You're not just saying things and nice slogans on the wall. It's nice to have artifacts. It's nice to have slogans. It's nice to have signage. Those things are cool, but if it doesn't reinforce what you're actually doing in the day-to-day, it doesn't mean anything, and people become pretty cynical pretty fast. So anyways, that's really cool that you've had that experience, and I'm all in on this culture business. I agree. I think I would fit well with you, certainly with your dad. Like, just the constant thinking on company culture is something that occupies my mind all the time. And maybe to start things off before we talk a little bit more about better culture, just to preface this, like I was reading an article. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn and I post articles daily and I read other people's articles. And there was this really interesting article, it was probably a year or two ago, where someone was basically suggesting that company culture is a myth, that it's like chasing your tail. Like, why even bother? And I even had a colleague I was talking to about, and he's like, yeah, the hubris of people to think that they could influence company culture. Like it's something that happens and we can't control it. And, that was the perspective of this colleague. And then in this LinkedIn article, they're basically saying, yeah, you're just chasing your tail. Don't even bother. And, I'm just kind of like, what? How does that make any sense? But clearly there's a contingent, like there's people who really believe that. I suspect that they're in the distinct minority, but I do see that. I see that surface from time to time. Perhaps you've had that experience as well. But I am 100% a believer that not only does culture exist anytime you get, a few people together or more, company culture exists, and we do have mechanisms and ability to shape it. And if we don't proactively try to shape it, it will take on a life of its own and it will become its own thing, usually in negative ways, usually in unhealthy ways. So it's our responsibility to try to mold it and shape it and direct it in a way that's consistent with our values, with our strategy, etc.
Couldn't agree more. I would love to respond to that just briefly. I was, and I'll do my best because this is so fun for me to respond to people that have that perspective. I was speaking at an association event in California 2 weeks ago, and I was talking to this gentleman on my way back to the airport, and he found out I was from Omaha, and he said, well, say hello to the big guy for me if you see him. Now, if you're from Omaha, there's only one big guy people might be talking about. That's probably Warren Buffett. I laughed and smiled. Well, Mr. Buffett has been known to say, look, one of the most successful investors of all time. Either when I talk to people about how I think about investment, they either get it immediately, or I can talk to them all day long till I'm blue in the face, and they will not see the way Mr. Buffett thinks about investing, long-term value, etc. It's been my experience the same thing with company culture. Either people already get it and they understand the obvious value of having a healthy workplace culture, which I can go into in a minute,
Yeah.
or I can talk to them till I'm blue in the face, and they will not, they're not likely to change their opinion. But I like to ask the question of, are you really telling me the term employee engagement gets thrown around a lot, which I don't love, but you could either have an employee who's prideful, energetic, positive, loyal, connected, likes their teammates, respects their manager, is connected to their organization, or you could have an employee that is it's a job, shows up, kind of does what they're asked, but isn't terribly connected, isn't terribly energetic, shows up with a neutral attitude. And if I ask every manager, which one of those two employees do you want? They will say the first.
Right.
Now, if that same person will say, yeah, but culture doesn't have value, I'll say, now wait a minute. You just told me what I described is the type of employees you'll get in an organization with a healthy culture. And so it's not a myth, and it can absolutely be influenced. I've seen it firsthand hundreds of times with organizations. It's just people they don't have a construct for how to think about it. They don't have a knowledge base for what to do to build it. They don't have
Yeah.
tools to help support it, right? And so they kind of throw up their hands and say, well, it's just like chasing your tail. How you gonna, I mean, you can't really influence this thing. That's mostly a comment of ignorance or a lack of time on their behalf. It's either a lack of time or a lack of know-how to build it.
Yeah, certainly a lack of time, a lack of know-how. What would you think from this perspective of the colleague that I had who, and he's a great strategist, but he has this attitude that it's hubris to even think that we could influence it. Um, Thoughts
Mhm.
on that? Like I was kind of baffled when he said that.
I don't quite understand where the hubris would come from. The definition we like to use for culture is the attitudes and behaviors that a group of people comes to expect from one another, right?
Yeah.
So, and that applies in a work setting, it applies in a friend group or a social group. Just
Yep.
if you close your eyes and you think about a group of people gathering together tomorrow, what are the attitudes and the behaviors that you might expect when you show up to interact with that group, to be a part of that team? And every single person that's a part of that team, based on how they show up every day and the attitudes and behaviors that they bring to that entity, is shaping the culture, right? If every
Mhm.
time you come into a group that I'm a part of, I'm down and dour and complaining and throwing my boss under the bus, then that's an attitude and a behavior that becomes part of the culture. And I have now shaped that for you, John. If you show up to that team and that's how I show up every day, I am shaping the attitudes and behaviors that you can expect when you come in tomorrow. And so it's not complicated to shape a culture. It's what are the attitudes and behaviors that you show up with.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you touched on a minute ago, this idea of a healthy culture, hopefully shaping, a dynamic, healthy, engaged, empowering culture. What are some of those elements that you think are most important in a healthy culture, and how can we go about developing those?
Elements is a hard
Mm,
question to answer. Simplistically, leadership principles, core values, things like that are certainly important. When I'm working with organizations on a deeper level, I talk about areas
okay.
that five parts of your company that should all have a people and culture strategy, or the tools and the knowledge to know how that part of the company can help build culture. And I think those five areas are your executives, your management, your top management team, your HR and people operations group, uh, managers, mid-level and frontline managers, emerging leaders and culture champions, people with energy and people that are rising stars in the organization. And then the last bucket is the one that I know you and I are going to talk some about today, but that's just every employee, all employees. What
Yeah.
can every employee do to actively contribute to their culture? And so I do think the best organizations are regularly making progress in all five of those areas
Mm.
to make work both better for the company and better for their employees. And that's kind of what it means to invest in culture on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, and I do see it as an investment. You mentioned this earlier as well. It some people really see it as a money pit. Like, why focus on culture? You're just going to throw money towards programs, initiatives, surveys, all sorts of stuff. You're going to waste people's time. It's not going to really move the needle. And let's focus on the core business. That's the argument I hear people make. And I get it. Like, and if you don't do culture work well, then yeah, I mean, they're probably right.
Right.
But there
Right.
there is a way to do it well. And I mentioned the three-pronged stool earlier. You've essentially said, no, it's a five-pronged stool. There's these five, however we define it,
Yeah.
absolutely. There are multiple facets. Like, if we want to holistically shift and change a culture in a positive, sustainable way, you can't just take a one prong approach. It just won't work. It won't be sustainable. And that's often what organizations do, is they'll invest a lot of time and money into like one of those areas that you
Yeah.
identified, and they'll have commitment, and they'll put resources behind it, and it just won't stick. It won't actually move the needle. And I look at that, I'm like, of course not. Like, of
A,
course it wouldn't,
a
because
flash in the
you're
pan is never
it,
gonna make
it's
a
never, yeah,
lasting
it's
change.
just
No.
never going to take hold. So you have to take the multi-prong approach. Now, yeah, I did want to focus a little bit on the bottom up. Now, clearly, the other areas are also important. I think
Absolutely.
we both articulated that. I'm a firm believer in that. But I do believe strongly in bottom up, grassroots types of efforts as well, and getting everyone on board with culture and with having a positive environment, I think is very, very powerful. What has been your experience in trying to do that and help organizations accomplish that?
Yeah, we've been on a really fun journey the last couple of years with our small company here that is again on a mission to make the world a better place to work. And we started by asking ourselves this question as a consulting and training firm: what can we do to help clients build culture from the bottom up? We've done leadership offsites and strategy with
Yep.
executive teams. We've done, a lot of mid-level management development and training. That stuff's super important. But when we were working with clients, one thing we would say, gosh, even when we have our best engagements, we're only interacting with 10 to 15%
Right.
of the employees of an organization, because we're leadership focused exclusively.
Yep.
And we asked ourselves a question of, what would it look like to build a solution, or what should companies be doing to try to more intentionally improve their workplace culture from the bottom up? And that took us on a very interesting journey toward a lot of research, a lot of conversations, a lot of working with
Mhm.
organizations to figure out, what are the types of core values that exist for every employee across, dozens and dozens of organizations. And we worked really hard to compile those things initially with the thought of, we want to have a clear picture of what does a great culture look like bottom up, sort of universally. And we had a lot, as you can imagine, of ideas and values that we had collected from a lot of great organizations, and it was overwhelming. There was just too much stuff there.
Mm.
And so we started trying to decide, in our mind, we wanted to build an intervention tool. So we ended up building a product, which I'm not here to talk about the product specifically, but we ended up building a product that ended up having 20 what we call tenets of workplace culture. We kind of compiled these down into 20 things. But
Mhm.
as we were trying to figure that out, what we started asking ourselves is, well, yes, if employees would show up and do these things, we think it would be good for companies. But why would employees want to show up and do these things? What's their incentive? Um, and so before we compiled what ended up being a list that we've started to roll out with organizations via this product, we said, let's make sure that these 20 things also are positively correlated with personal
Mm.
success,
Mm.
personal happiness. And we think there's an opportunity for organizations to talk to their employees and to say, look, there are behaviors, there are attitudes, there are things that will serve our company well, that'll serve our team well, but also will serve you well as individual employees. And so that's, in my mind, what I think it looks like to try to build culture from the bottom up is to develop employees in a way that's good for them, but it's
Yeah.
also good for their team and good for culture from the bottom up. So it doesn't seem like a self-serving initiative from a company perspective to say, would you please just show up and do our core values? We think there's a deeper opportunity than that to make an investment in people to help them be more successful and happy in life and help build culture at the same time.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's not either or, right?
Mhm.
Like these things really can and should mesh together well. And part of the challenge is we just often don't communicate
Yeah.
clearly what those benefits are. So
Mhm.
people, the line employees within an organization, they just hear, something coming down, through the grapevine, through the hierarchy, and a lot of times all they hear is disruption, change. I'm going to have to work with different people. I'm comfortable where I'm at now. Things are going to be different. I'm going to have to adopt a new technology, blah, blah, blah. Like there's that resistance to change that happens, as there's these top down initiatives. If there's no champions from, the grassroots level who are also trying to help people understand, no, like really, this is mutually beneficial. This is going to certainly help the organization. We'll be more productive. We'll be, more innovative. We'll work more collaboratively. On and on. There's all these positive benefits for the organization as a whole, but that also means that there's going to be more opportunities for advancement. There's going to be more opportunities for development. You're going to get to work on cool stuff because now we're in this dynamic, innovative environment. Now we're in a place with psychological safety where we encourage people to try things, and to experiment and to iterate. All of that I would, say is part of a really great, healthy organizational culture. It often doesn't exist in most organizations unless there's intentionality put behind it. And so most people want to work in that kind of an environment. It's the kind of thing where you get excited to wake up in the morning, to get out of bed and go to work because you work with cool people on cool stuff, and you're staying cutting edge, etc. And let's communicate that like more
Yeah.
clearly to people, so it's not just compliance. It boggles my mind sometimes when I see a really cool initiative in an organization, like really cool, like I could get way on board with it, but all of their communication is around mandates and compliance and like stuff
Yes.
like that. I'm like, what are you doing to yourself? You're like shooting yourself in the foot and
Right.
cutting things out, the legs out from under you in your efforts to try to get the buy-in from line level workers from the bottom up. So
Yeah.
I completely agree. Like trying to generate that, communicating those benefits well, and letting people understand, like, no, this is going to help you 100%. This is going to
Yeah.
help your team. This is going to help the organization.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can give you an example or two of what a few of these things are that we identified, and then I'd love to share a story
Yeah.
because we have some internal conflict going on in our company around how to use this IP that we've built because we're
Hmm.
identifying opportunities both on the culture side and on the professional development side, and those are
Right.
potentially two different markets, which I think is interesting. And the so just as an example, these are simple things, right? Like being coachable. Okay.
Yeah.
Learn, be more coachable. Well, every employer I work with says, of course, that's one of the top things we're looking for when we're hiring someone. We want people that are coachable. Well, it's also good for the individual. If you want to be successful and happy in life, there's a lot of clear data that says people that are coachable, that seek feedback, that are looking for opportunities to change and grow over time are much more likely to become more successful and more happy. So this is a win-win thing. Why don't we talk more about it, right? Assuming positive intent. This is a simple concept that most organizations would say, oh, yeah, that's clearly helpful for our culture. It's also helpful for mental health, for happiness in life, to get better at genuinely assuming positive intent in others. You don't get so upset when somebody cuts you off in traffic. You can get better at things like road rage or family relationships, etc. If you can just
Yeah.
internalize, you know what? I'm pretty good at assuming positive intent from other people. And not only does that contribute to team health and culture, but it contributes to my mental health and my
Hmm.
satisfaction in life. If I can just get a little bit better at assuming that person isn't trying to make my day worse by jumping in line in front of me or etc. Right. And so there are so many things where there are win-wins when it comes to both personal development and company culture.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I love that the focus that you just made on getting past the pessimism and the cynicism that I think
Yeah.
is so pervasive in a lot of organizations. And I find myself falling into that trap as well. It's human nature. And so it can be disrupted, those thought patterns, and you can have a more gracious, understanding, forgiving,
Mhm.
type of an attitude as you approach interactions with people. It really is my experience that most people, there are the occasional jerks and narcissists that are just, whatever, but most people wake up in the morning just wanting to get through their day, to do the best they can. They want to do right by others. They want to be a good person. Most
Yeah,
people, the vast majority of people want that. And so when something negative happens, not to diminish the the negative thing, like there are negative impacts, it can, people get hurt, etc. Those things need to be acknowledged, they need to be addressed. But approaching addressing those challenges with not assuming ill intent and focusing more, be soft on people, hard on systems. That's kind of what I often say. Like when someone does something that's not a great behavior, or it negatively impacts somebody, oftentimes there's some sort of a system or process or procedure or protocol, policy that's behind that behavior in some way that,
yes.
maybe the person themselves didn't even like doing that thing, but they kind of felt stuck because that's what they're told they have to do. And so, like, soft on people, hard on systems. Let's look when something bad happens, let's acknowledge it. Let's try to approach it in a healthy way, and then try to tackle what could be changed within the systemic,
Yeah.
workings of the organization so this doesn't happen again.
And so I completely agree. Soft on people, hard on systems is a great framework. I've not heard that before. And that's the reason that most organizations fail at at doing anything proactive to build culture from the bottom up. Is they're not saying, well, this isn't a good idea. They're saying, how do you do that? Like, I don't have
Mm-hmm.
a system for that. Like, well, if I have 500 employees or 1,000 employees, or even, if you get too small, it's a little easier. But if you've got levels of employees and they're in different locations or they're virtual, et cetera, how can I centrally try to do anything to help enable my company and my managers to build culture from the bottom up? And what we found is most organizations would say, we don't have that tool. We don't have any idea. How would you even go about doing that? And so that's what we've built, is a set of tools, a software product, a set of principles that can enable executives, mid-level folks, frontline managers, and even every single employee, if they want to, culture champions, to invest in themselves, to change their behaviors, to build better culture from the bottom up. And systematizing that is the hard work of saying, how do you equip a manager with a team of 7? What do you tell them to do to help them build their team and build their culture? And we think we have answers to that, but that's something that organizations really struggle with,
Yeah.
is finding processes, systems, resources, to enable that development at the local, every employee level.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Brett, this has just been a fascinating conversation. We've only scratched the surface, but I do note the time. I need to let you go here in just a minute. Before we
Yeah.
wrap things up for today, I wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, your team, and then give us a final word on the topic for today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you can always, I'm on LinkedIn, obviously, Brett Hoogeveen, HOO, and then you'll get there. Or you can go to betterculture.com is a great way to connect with us. The product I was referring to is called the 20 Tenets of Culture. So if you go to betterculture.com/20 tenets, you can find out a little bit about that. Or just submit an inquiry on our website. We'd love to talk with anybody who aligns with us that believes that a better culture will lead to a better business.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much, Brett. It's just been a real pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Brett and his team can do for you. Check out the website, check out the resources. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the podcast. We hope you stay healthy and safe, and please join us again soon.